Good afternoon. My name's Steve Cowper. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm from June 365, and June 365 is a corporate wellness solution developed by Fisher & Paykel Technologies. And that's really designed to reimagine the way we use physical wellness to unlock holistic wellbeing. Like most organisations, we had some great plans of bringing June to the market when lockdown hit very recently. So we had to think pretty quickly, put a lot of our plans aside, and we saw an opportunity to bring some like-minded organisations and some of our first customers together to have a series of conversations around adapting to change in uncertain environments. This is the fourth of our sessions, and today we do have Hugh Norrie from the Mental Health Foundation joining us. But before I ask Hugh to join, the session will be about 30 minutes long. We'll have about 15 minutes of questions, and if you would like to submit your questions, you'll see a section on the bottom right of your viewing window to be able to put those through, and we'll come back to those at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Hugh to join me.
Hi there, Steve.
Hi, Hugh. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Very good.
I really appreciate you joining us. Like I said, this is the fourth in a series so far, and we've had some really great conversations last week, starting off with what our capacity to adapt to change is and some of the tools that we can leverage to be able to recharge our batteries. We had Pete from FMG talking to us about how wellness and wellbeing comes into a sustainable business model. And today we're here to talk about an integrated approach to mental health in the workplace. So I guess where I'd like to start is, would you be able to explain to our audience, I guess, the difference between mental health and mental illness, and how are they interrelated?
Yeah, sure, Steve. Well, if we think of the definition of mental health as just being like the health of the mind overall, well, then there's two general aspects of it that we need to look at. And so one aspect that gets measured at a population level, so we can work out what's happening in the general community, is the sort of extent of poor mental health or mental illness in the population. And then the other way it gets measured is through wellbeing scales, large-scale surveys there. So you might just want to pull up that diagram, Steve, and I'll talk through it if you like.
All right. Let's just have a look here.
Yeah, because this, to make sense of understanding this is just like a very simple orientating map. I mean, it's a lot more complex than this, obviously, in real life, but this gives a good starting point for organisations to understand where their employees might be at when you've got a group of people, because workplaces, they basically represent what's out there in the community. You know, the people coming to work have the same kind of patterns and conditions and so forth as people in the community. So if we look at this, so at that horizontal line there, so that represents poor mental health. And so this gets measured in terms of mental illness symptoms. And the things that make up mental illness symptoms include things like low mood, anxiety, constant anxiety, mood swings, sleeping problems, inability to concentrate, intrusive thoughts, despair and hopelessness, that sort of thing. So they're all symptoms of poor mental health. And if we have enough of those symptoms, then we'll reach the threshold where we'll probably be diagnosed with a mental illness if we went to see a mental health clinician. So if we have enough symptoms and for sort of a period of time, then we will reach that threshold. And in any 1 year, it's from the studies at the moment, it's estimated that around 20% of people will meet the criteria for an actual mental illness, and the most common ones are depression, anxiety-related problems, or addictions. But the important thing to note is that it's on a continuum, so we all have some of these mental illness symptoms. You know, we all have ups and downs in life, so we'll all have times when we're quite low, for instance, or have trouble sleeping, or whatever. We're not.
And that's a fairly natural part of our lives.
It is, yeah, that's right. I mean, but the point is, when it gets overwhelming and it's affecting our ability to function well, that's when, you know, we need to get professional support, and we may have a mental illness. So the other thing to note is that actually, when we look at like our Ministry of Health data, and it's the same in all of the richer countries across the globe, is that we're finding quite an increase in psychological distress. So the 20% or the 1 in 5 figure, that was based 10 years ago, but over the last 10 years, psychological distress has, particularly among young people, has pretty much doubled. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'll just turn off the screen share for a moment. You know, are we seeing an increased prevalence, or is it a matter that we're actually just getting more data or visibility of what's been present for some time?
Yeah, I think when you look at the data, it's definitely actually increasing, because the surveys that I'm thinking of, they actually ask people directly about these symptoms. If it was just asking about people who were diagnosed, then you would think, yes, it might just be people are more aware, more people are going to the doctor and getting diagnoses and so forth. But it does definitely seem to be a very real increase. And but the diagnoses are also increasing. Depression, anxiety, and antidepressant use as well is on a very steep upward.
What are you seeing that, or what are some of the acknowledged drivers? Because I think, you know, we look in the last 18 months and we've had COVID that's really put some significant pressure in a whole raft of different areas, from job insecurity and financial insecurity, health insecurity, social isolation, which can impact, I guess, as well-being and mental illness. But we've seen a trend before that. What are some of the indicating drivers of that?
Yeah, so the last 10 years prior to COVID, there was a very steep increase, and it's probably jumped again during COVID. So I think probably some of the things, looking at the research that are driving this, you know, in the last 10 years. So we already had things like poverty and discrimination and adverse childhood experiences that do affect mental health. But on top of that, I think we've seen a rapid increase in uncertainty, and certainly COVID is a massive uncertainty aspect in our lives, but just general uncertainty, constant change, people, you know, not quite knowing who they're meant to be and what they're meant to do, you know, everything changing so rapidly, and that's a stressor on our brain. So there's 3 areas. The first, uncertainty. The other one I'd say would be massive increase in social comparison. And humans find we're a social species. We find it quite stressful when we look at other people who we think that are doing better than us. So obviously social media drives that hugely, and this whole celebrity culture, all that sort of thing. And then the third area I would say would be this incredible bias towards bad news, but actually the sophistication of news media now to put out constant bad, scary news, and like it all has videos attached to it now as well. And that's how they make money, obviously, by telling us the bad news, because good news doesn't sell, as you probably know. So those would be 3 major factors, and it's driving polarization in society as well. And a lot of the technology, I mean, it has a great upsides, but it's sometimes the technology seems to be managing us rather than we managing it. So those would be the 3 trends there I think we need to look out for. And the reason, like, we're talking about it now is because workplaces are having to deal with this. You know, as people come into the workplace, under this psychological pressure that we don't fully understand. You know, it's an issue that has to get managed. So maybe for some more positive news, we could go back to the diagram and I'll tell you about wellbeing before we all get too depressed.
No worries.
Yeah. So the other way to look at mental health is well-being, and this is now well measured. So well-being is just not the absence of symptoms. You could get rid of all of those mental illness symptoms I talked about, but still not necessarily have a high level of well-being. So well-being, some of the key aspects of well-being are things like optimism, having a strong meaning and purpose in life, feeling strong social support around you, being part of a collective group, because it's not just an individual thing, it's sort of tied in with your social group being well also. Contributing to the community, feeling like you're accomplishing things, sense of vitality, and just a general feeling that life is going well. So these are all aspects of well-being on that vertical scale there. And fortunately in New Zealand, these are quite high. We score quite well on well-being scales. And if you put these two aspects of well-being together, like we all experience some level of well-being and all experience some level of ill-being. That's just life, and we've got to stop having these binary approaches to it, that you're either well or you're not. And if we look at the 4 quadrants here, we can see that for the purposes of the workplace, you know, you're going to get 4 general sort of psychological states appearing in your people in the workplace. So if it was based on the numbers that we get from these population studies, if you had a team of 25 people, like roughly 5 would be thriving, probably about 10 would be struggling, another 5 would be unwell, and then another 5 would be managing. So we'll just talk about those 4 areas and then what workplaces can do in each of those, if that's all right with you, Steve.
Yeah, that works. Yep.
Yeah, I think I got my maths right there for the 25. So thriving, so these are people with few mental illness symptoms but high well-being. So in the workplace, you know, you really want to encourage these people to stay well, and look at what they're doing as well, because they'll have some good skills that is keeping their well-being high. So we can learn from people when they have high well-being. And also often people who have high well-being might be your well-being champions who get really enthusiastic about supporting well-being initiatives in your organisation.
Do we have to be careful about, I guess, taking our eyes off those people in a sense of getting comfortable that, gee, we've got a group of people here thriving, we'll just focus on the other groups?
Yep. We absolutely do, and it's very easy to get and focus all on the negative, but actually with mental health, it's often the positive aspects that can pull people out of some of the deeper struggles. So that we know from the research that if you can increase your well-being, it's not going to eliminate your risk of having mental illness altogether, but it certainly reduces it, and it builds in resilience. Like there's a strong tie between well-being and resilience. And the other thing to remember is that when they measure people's mental health in populations, say over a 10-year period, they find that actually people have moved around these quadrants. Mm-hmm. So the numbers are still the same, you know, like 5, 10, 5, 5, but you've got a different set of people, and that just shows that our mental health fluctuates. So we might thrive for a while, and then we might struggle and even become unwell but get on track again. These things are not neat kind of things that we can't banish the challenges of life altogether just because we've got well-being.
Life's not particularly neat by nature, is it? You know,
it's not. And yeah, and you were sharing your story with me earlier, Steve, about how you've sort of been on a journey through these different quadrants.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'll turn off the deck there.
Yeah, we can come back to it.
Look, I think it's great to have these types of conversations. It's very close to my heart. I think I mentioned to you, you know, the 18 to 25 years were certainly not the glory periods of my life, and I had some real issues with anxiety and depression, and actually they're always there. It's not a matter of those things disappearing. It's just over time learning how to handle it, or identifying the triggers earlier and trying to flatten out the curve of the impacts. And work, I guess, is a place that I've used to move out of some of those darker places at times, because it gives me a real focus, sense of purpose, place to get energized and bring energy. So I think it's great that we're having this conversation. Maybe we go and have a look at some of that struggling part.
Yeah, we'll go through that. And I'll just also say for myself, just before we get on to that, my experience, I was actually the chief executive of a mental health organisation, and I was struggling, verging on unwell. In fact, I did get some GB support and antidepressants, but I was one of these people who was coming to work all calm and collected, pretty tired because I wasn't sleeping, but at home I was a wreck. I was terrible. And that was a mental health organisation I was running. So I've learned myself now that I would be much more open. But actually that period of struggle and unwellness was what really made me interested in well-being, because the pain and the suffering of that gave me the real impetus to actually learn well-being and to keep myself well as much as possible. And that's when I started my fantastic well-being journey. But anyway, on to that struggling quadrant.
Just before you go to that struggling quadrant, you know, you mentioned you're a chief executive and you're of a mental health organisation and you're finding these challenges. I'd just like to call out, I think it's really important that we remember in our executives that there's a person behind the job title too.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's easy to forget when you're deeper down in an organisation or further at the front lines of an organisation that those people you're reporting up to have all of the same emotions and things going on at home, and it's not just a job title.
Yeah, lonely is the head that wears the crown. And I do think that one of the best things that chief executives can do now, and I should have done that, I would do it now, is actually to be much better at expressing their vulnerability. Like Sean Robinson at the Mental Health Foundation, he's a great example of this, where he talks openly about his struggles, and then it's just out in the open, and you just say, well, I'm a leader, but I'm also vulnerable, but that's one of my strengths, you know. And another example would be Craig Hudson, the managing director of Xero. He's been very open about his experience. So anyway, the struggling quadrant. So this is where people are not mentally unwell, like they have some mental illness symptoms, but what they do have in spades is a lack of well-being. So they're lacking sort of meaning and purpose, they're disengaged, they're not really feeling enthusiastic about life, you know, lacking vitality, all of those sort of things. And so, as I mentioned, with the proportions out of the 10 out of your 25 roughly might be in this area, this is a common reflection of where our society's at. And so these people aren't going to need to be diagnosed with a mental illness and that sort of treatment, but I think they do respond well to coaching, things like EAP, employee assistance programs, having managers that can help manage conflict and put up clear boundaries, because often people in this space are quite grumpy and a bit prone to conflict. And organisations can be really helpful because work, if it's done half well, is actually very good for mental health, because it gives people some routine and meaning and purpose. And so holding people to their workplace accountabilities can actually be helpful in the long run. And often people are going through this. Yeah.
I mean, that's really quite powerful, because we might, you know, immediately think, gee, I need to give someone some space and give them the time away from the workplace, but consideration around actually what going to work does for patterns of behaviour and engagement and the, you know, how much time you spend there can be a powerful tool in other aspects.
Yeah, and especially if you're supporting those thriving people, you know, emotions are contagious. So if you've got some positive people around, it can help people pull people out of negative spaces. So these are the kind of skills that managers can learn, and they, there's some really good managers that do have these skills, but it's the kind of thing we could do more of. And then struggling people, we know that they're at risk of becoming mentally unwell because the aspects of stress, they do that. If they keep going, like toxic stress carries on for a period, it's likely to morph into a depression or anxiety problem or an addiction. So when people are unwell, managers need a specific set of skills here, because you're wanting to get professional services for people to support people as well. So there's a whole lot of skills around liaising with professionals, how managers can understand that they're not going to be a therapist. They still need to be a manager. That's a temptation. And also, it's things like managing sick leave, privacy concerns, accommodations, just like accommodations for physical illness. Can you make aspects of the work easier? How do you have these sensitive conversations that I've found, like, people are terrified of having these conversations with somebody that they think they're unwell, but they're all skills that can be learned. We just haven't been taught them yet. So the Mental Health Foundation, we have developed an online training program with 3 modules, 40 minutes each, and it's for line managers, and it teaches them all these skills online. So that's a very practical resource if people want to look at that. It's on the Mental Health Foundation website.
Yeah, and I think we'll share those tools out to the audience. After this session.
Yep. And the 4th quadrant there, managing. So this is when people are recovering from. So they may have been unwell for a while, but they've got good treatment in place. And there's no reason, if you have good therapeutic treatment, it might be medications, psychotherapy, or a combination of both, lifestyle therapies, and they're managing their mental illness. So the skills here for the organisation is to understand what these people need to stay well, and maybe have a wellness plan that they agree with them. And that can be quite powerful, because, as we were talking about before, work can also be therapeutic. So they're coming back to work. They're getting. They may have had some time off if it was a serious illness, and they want to get back on the horse. And so the organisation play a real crucial role here in supporting these people back to work. And again, this is reasonably common, because so many people have experienced mental illness, and about half of us will meet that threshold in our lifetime. Well, it's probably higher than that now with those increasing numbers. Some people actually say it's around about 80%. So it's almost a universal thing that people will go through at some point in their lives. So there you have it. That's the sort of the basis of the integrated approach to mental health. You're integrating the great wellness stuff, positive stuff, but also acknowledging that you've got difficult stuff to deal with as well. But actually, if you join these things together, you can see that people are not either broken or fantastically well. We're all a mix of both. And actually, sometimes the downtimes with our mental health, emotional pain exists for a reason, just like physical pain. Often our emotional pain is telling us that something is wrong, and we need to adjust our lives. We need to get a different type of support. We need to do something differently. And that, of course, that's what most people do with good therapy, with a mental illness, and then they can recover and adjust their lives and usually come out to be stronger people. And mental health advocates like John Kerwin say that depression was a gift, because it told him the direction that he needed to go in, that deeper direction, and all the work he's done with that, which has given him a very rewarding and fulfilling life, more so than the mental illness.
And I think that that representation is a great way to understand the differences between mental illness and well-being, in the sense of, especially for myself, I'm 40 years of age, and like I mentioned, late teens, early 20s was a pretty dark period for me. And I carried a lot of stigma wanting to talk about it because mental health meant, you know, a clinical diagnosis and everything that went along with it. So I was pretty reluctant to ask for help, even from family. But certainly being able to look at a representation like that, the reason why I personally would join a company now is because it aligns to my values, and naturally that gives me a lot of fulfillment. And I'm not very happy staying somewhere, and it's no good for me personally in an organisation like that. But separating that away from a clinical diagnosis and mental illness, knowing that there's little bits of the puzzle that you can be addressing before you need really serious intervention, perhaps.
Yes.
That continuum.
Yes.
Just like John Kerwin, you know, I had a great leader in a sales organisation that spoke about productive anxiety, and this was a bit of the light bulb moment for me personally with anxiety, to go, anxiety is not just a really negative thing. In fact, it could be a superpower. And if you look at a personal drive to succeed and look at the work you've done and trying to do more or better in your own little way all the time, that could be a really powerful thing at work and for self. But if you don't take the time to step back and get some objectivity of what you've achieved over time, you can get into a destructive anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a really good point. And these things are always much better managed like that. I've heard a lot of people talk about and I've experienced myself, the benefit of anxiety, because it actually can motivate you in positive ways. But it's just so important to have that positive social support around you so that you don't go off. It's very easy to get off on a tangent and go to a dark place with some of this stuff. So having people around you that know who you are and your positives, and that's what workplaces can become. You know, not it's not oversharing stuff, but just having a general awareness about where people are at and able to talk about stuff during the lunch break or whatever. Or
I think that's a really good link to this next part, in that we take the concept, we spend the vast majority of our life in the workplace for a lot of us, and it's good to get a sense of who people are around us and understand the human. How can organisations practically get a sense of where their workers are against that quadrant model?
Yeah, well, I think there's two aspects to this, and you know, there's an art and a science to this. I think some workplaces are looking for technical fixes, but actually, this is about having a greater sensitivity to people's humanity and their diversity and people's needs and unique attributes that they all bring. But I think you need two approaches, the top down and the bottom up, not surprisingly. So the top down, if leadership doesn't support this, it's quite hard to get going. So I think what leaders need to do is to show that they're human as well and be a bit more open about expressing their vulnerabilities and that they sometimes need to ask for help. And as you were saying before, you know, they're not these bulletproof. That's not the ultimate leader that you want to promote in an organisation. The human leader, I think, is better. But that doesn't mean you still can't get really good stuff done. You're just saying, well, you do that in the context of being human. The other thing that leaders can help with is, you know, look at the culture of the organisation and make sure that culture respects diversity and differences and doesn't have judgments about people should be this way or that. You know, just be a lot open to how human experience can manifest. The other thing that's really powerful, I think, is to set up a listening culture, because I think for mental health, listening is one of the most powerful things we can do if we do it properly, both for the listener and the person being listened to. But, and I'm not talking about the sort of the vacuous listening where you just tick box, you know, consultation stuff. This is about validating people by really listening to them without a preconceived idea first. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them at the end, but it's just really validating who they are. And that can be so powerful for people. And if you're listening to somebody who's struggling, it's thinking, well, I'm not listening with them with the thought that I'm going to give them advice. I'm listening to them so they can work out their own advice. And by providing that safe space for people where they can express themselves and feel that they're not going to be judged, it's very powerful for people to be able to start finding their own solutions. And that's always the best way to do it.
And that's not an easy thing to do, you know.
It's not easy. It's simple, but not easy. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we all carry the baggage of the last conversation at work, and when we step into the next one, and you know, you can express your emotions and be caught up in your own head when you're talking to people. So that's
yeah. But I mean, once you try it a few times and get used to, I mean, I'm very much on the journey of trying to get better at this, but I have noticed that it works very powerfully in everybody's favour, and that people just want to be seen and validated. You know, and there's so little of that in the way we're organising our current culture from what I can see. So we need to get back on track with that and empower ourselves a bit more. And then, you know, a good leader will acknowledge strengths and not just, I mean, you can go too far the other way and try and start treating your workforce as very fragile and that they all have to be looked after. But I think there's you want to acknowledge that people might struggle, but actually that people also have incredible strengths. If they get the right support, those strengths will come out. And that's much more empowering for people than to be told that they're fragile and they might all become mentally unwell. You know, so there's a balance there. And then good work design. You know, the work has got to be designed well. Otherwise, you're going to cause untold psychological stress on people if the work hours are all over the place and the work's not clear and there's conflict and all that sort of thing. So good work design. So the Business Leaders Forum in New Zealand, they've got a good program on this that we could also put up as one of the resources.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, based on Hilary Bennett's work, people might have heard of it. So I think that's a good place for the top-down side. And then from the bottom up, I think it's just about supporting supporting the overall team to be much more confident, to be able to talk about this stuff without, and that it's accepted as part of the culture, and to also provide the training, just some basic training. So again, that's what I mentioned before with our Open Minds module. That's what that's designed to do, because it's a skill-based approach. We can talk about awareness raising and everything until the cows come home, but actually I think we need to get into some skills in this area
and
now.
That's a set of tools that are freely available to organisations from.
Yes, all free. Yep. I'm not sure about
Just going back to, you know, if I reflect on Peter's Frizzell's conversation around well-being in a sustainability model, you know, him and his team do a lot of work looking for what can they embed to get sustainable change. This type of training module, is that something people can use on a regular basis to refresh and embed and learn from?
Yes, and there's plenty of suggestions in the training of where they can go for next steps as well. So yeah,
fantastic. So we got some great.
It's not something you do one off. It's definitely an ongoing process, I think. Yeah.
We've got some great questions coming through, and I'm conscious of time because you're a great person to talk to. So we'll just go through some of these. What's the best approach for managers to have conversations with their team about mental health if they notice individuals showing some of the symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really one right or wrong way, but I think there's some principles that you'd apply to the conversation. So I think definitely base it on that listening. Open listening is going to be quite powerful. So when people are struggling a bit with their mental health, they've often had an experience before where they have been negatively judged. So they're going to be quite reticent probably about talking around it. And so what you can do, I think, is just show that you're going to keep the conversation confidential. So you need to be clear about that up front. And there are some exceptions to that, which if there's a safety issue, then obviously someone else might need to be told. But in general, you know, that this isn't going to be something that's gossiped about with other people in the team, and that you just open up and listen, you know, and then occasionally show that you're listening by reflecting back to people what they've said, and show understanding. Really let them express to you what the particular problem is. I think I have noticed sometimes in workplaces, managers can get a bit hung up on, oh, is this a mental illness, or what sort of diagnosis is. But I think it's better to focus on what is the actual problem here that we need to support you with, and take quite a strong problem-solving approach.
Is it worthwhile for managers to, I guess, proactively talk openly to a team base about, hey, look, you know, let's talk, you know, let's make ourselves available?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I think as long as you do it in that context of the broader concept of mental health, so that we don't just talk about problems, but we also talk about people's strengths as well.
Yep.
And I think that makes it a lot more of a positive and a safer conversation to have. So what managers can do is they can model some healthy mental health approaches, and just be open with the team and saying, Lyle, I was really struggling last week, but I really appreciated the psychological support that you gave me as a team, maybe without even realizing, you know, somebody said this and it really boosted my well-being, and I was really struggling, but yeah.
That ties into the next question, which is, what's your advice for a manager who has mental illness and is finding it hard to support the team's mental well-being as well?
Yeah, well, one of the things for managers is they need to look after themselves as well. Like, it's the old put your oxygen mask on first. So if you've struggled with your mental health, I mean, that's obviously very challenging for you, and you need to make sure that you've got all your supports in place. So you've got someone, you know, if you have a discussion with your team and it brings stuff up for you, if you've got somewhere where you can go afterwards just to debrief or something like that. And but actually, as you probably picked up from what I'm saying, is actually your experience of psychological struggle and being open about that is actually probably more of an asset than a liability. We focused a little bit in our culture, in sort of Western culture over time, a little bit too much on medicalizing the mental health experience, and actually that's an important aspect of it. So I'm not saying that's wrong, but to only see mental health problems as kind of like a pathology or an illness, rather than often what they are as a signal to push us, you know, towards wellness. So lost the question slightly, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think from a business context too, you know, we're in an experience-based economy. We're getting greater customer expectations. We're getting technology disruption, and actually in a lot of places we're looking for higher EQ. And I would relate my personal experiences of the roller coaster in increasing my awareness of self, other people around me, and those can help, I guess, in understanding some more of those creative, disruptive skills.
Yeah, and look, there's so many good tools now that are based on evidence that we can apply to our mental health. So they're coming out all the time. I like to try them all because I'm a bit of a nerd in this space. But there's so many things that we can find that will suit us to keep our mental health topped up, if you like.
Can you give a quick idea of what stage do you suggest time off for somebody when they're struggling? And also, at what stage do you get people back to work? What's the best back to work approach?
Yeah, often that will be done. It'll be a recommendation often from a GP around that. Not always. From a GP or a mental health professional, they might recommend just some time off to have a break. But I think it's better rather than it just be ad hoc, to be sort of part of an overall picture about, what is that time off going to be achieving for the person, rather than, I think it used to be, oh, they're not coping mentally, just take time off. And it's not necessarily the best option for some people, because then it isolates them from people, takes all of that good stuff that work could provide. So it's really about having that discussion with the person to have a range of approaches that you might take. So it might be time off, but it might also be changing some aspects of the work that would make it easier, or maybe just reduced hours, or maybe changing the nature of the work. So have a number of things in the toolkit, and yeah, time off might be part of it. So sometimes people might just need a circuit breaker. But yeah.
Now this is a good one for the current times, because we're seeing, organisations really struggling with globally the great resignation and people choosing to change roles in some industries. So a question here, as a manager, how do you develop the right relationship of trust with new team members so they feel comfortable discussing, I guess, mental health and stresses with you?
Yeah, well, I'll just come back to this listening, because I do think listening is a superpower, and I do believe, and from my experience, that it's right up there for the top things that people want, is just to be seen by other people and to be acknowledged for who they are, and you have to be listened to feel seen, and acknowledged and validated. So I think that's a powerful thing to do, is just take the time to really get to know that person, and then they'll feel like, actually, I feel safe. They might not even be able to pinpoint it, but they'll feel, I feel safe in this environment. There's something about this that aligns with who I am. And these are the things that have got squeezed out in some of the high pressure, results orientated, corporate kind of cultures, is those deep human needs. And it's not that organizations need to be therapists or anything like that. It's just being a bit wise about, who people are, what the human species is, and adapting accordingly. Make sure you take care of your greatest asset, which is your people.
And I think the last question we have here, actually second to last question, and this is a good one for you and I. Men are usually closed when it comes to sharing the problems. How do I approach such a person who I know is struggling but keeping himself closed?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I definitely see that changing. Like, there's a lot of men that do feel comfortable to open up now, and some of that's been because we've got organisations like New Zealand Rugby and so forth who have programs, Headspace, I think it's called, and the work that Wellbeing does and things like that. So it is improving, but for people that are a bit closed, whether it's men or women, but possibly particularly men, often it's about building that trust, because they may have had bad experiences in the past where they've tried to open up, and then it's kind of been used against them a little bit. So again, listening to people rather than jumping in with solutions, and not trying to force it. Sometimes you have to be patient with this stuff, and I know patience doesn't go well with our modern task-orientated workplaces, but sometimes that's the best way to do it. And look, I've found in some of these very male-dominated organisations that I've worked in, like for instance the the stevedores, you know, at the ports, very, very, you know, quite masculine and male dominated. But there's some amazing men in those places who are acting as role models and very willing to open up, but they've just never had the chance. So you may have role models in your organisation that you could draw out. And some of these are real tough-looking guys, but they'll tell a real heart-rending story about their experience. But sometimes they just never get asked. So
we still have 2 questions, and we might leave it at that for now. I'm just conscious of time.
Yes.
One question here is, how do I approach a manager who has the attitude of just suck it up regarding mental health?
Yeah, well, that sort of manager, I think, is on the way out because they just won't succeed. But that's the long term sort of. But yeah. Short term, yeah, it's quite hard to break through. Sometimes individuals, and you might need to look at other aspects of your organisational culture where you can get some leverage on this point. Because sometimes middle managers, you know, they have quite a bit of power to be able to keep things the way they want. And often, I think it's worth recognising too that often people are saying that because they're actually quite frightened themselves about opening up. You know, they've always been taught that if you're vulnerable, that's gonna all unravel, and you'll be laughed at and called a sissy and all that sort of stuff. So often people are harbouring a bit of a fear of their own as well. So yeah, although we shouldn't have to, you know, we hear about managing upwards. It sometimes is just trying to maybe even ask questions to your manager, you know, not directly, but just try and find out a bit more about them as well, because sometimes under that tough exterior is quite a very soft and frightened child that's never been allowed to come out and express its vulnerability. Yeah.
And I think to wrap it up nicely, we're coming up to Mental Health Awareness Week. We're a little bit ahead of the game on this one. We have a question here. As a corporate, what are some of the best things we can do for our employees during Mental Health Awareness Week? And maybe how can we tie back to what we've been discussing today from an integrated view?
Yeah. Well, it's great to, use the theme, time to court it all. And of course, that includes not just talking, but listening, which is what we've been talking about. But Mental Health Awareness Week, it provides, not that you need an excuse, but it just provides that impetus to spend a bit of extra time on this. But I think organisations always like to go back to the basics, which is really promoting the 5 ways to wellbeing, which is those simple, everyday things we can do around give, take notice, keep learning, being active, and connecting with each other. Just those, and being creative with how you do that in the workplace, and just keep it simple, because simplicity, small and often, is better in this space, I think. So lots of little stuff, like your 5 fruit and vegetables. Make things that can be regular habits in your organisation. And I think the other thing that I would like to see organisations just being a bit bolder around is looking at some of the thinking issues that are crucial to good mental health. And again, these don't need to be complicated, but the kind of things I'm thinking of is having a bit of a push to, hey guys, we need to protect our minds a bit better. Like, we've learned that we can't eat junk food all the time, so we need to think of what's the kind of junk food for the mind that's out there at the moment. And I think about this as limiting your time on social media and limiting doom scrolling through the negative news. Just and having a bit of fun with things like that, about having not saying we don't have those things, but just limiting them a little bit, just like we do junk food. And then learning skills like reframing. There's all sorts of things around psychological reframing, because the mind, our thoughts are just suggestions most of the time. Our brain isn't designed to actually have a a definite understanding of reality all the time. It brings up suggestions, and so we have a lot of scope to learn the skills of just pausing and then thinking, actually, I don't like that suggestion. Is there another option we can use to make this situation more helpful for me and others? And can we reframe this to a more positive thing? So that's a good practical one. And then finally, the skills of calming and soothing, I think. There's all sorts of fantastic techniques now that we can use to calm and soothe ourselves that don't involve alcohol or drugs. And just one real simple one is breathing. I mean, the science behind this is amazing, but just deep breaths from the belly through the nose, 6 or 7 of those, for most people will have a huge calming effect on the nervous system. And in the modern workplace, we all need plenty of that from time to time.
Yeah, the explanation of that really hit and stuck with me was, and potentially cliched, from a Buddhist monk, but the explanation was, you've got the monkey brain chattering away, and you can create a narrative in your mind very easily. And that can be positive or negative, but by focusing on the breathing, we're able to give the monkey brain something to do, which is actually focusing on the in and out breath cycle, which gives you that little moment of peace and clarity. And I found that a really useful tool, because I'm not a big meditator personally. But yeah, I found that a really useful explanation to get the resonance of why is that breathing moment that we can all do in very useful ways in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Look, I think we're going to run out of time, so we've only got 5 minutes to the hour. But I just want to say a huge thanks, Hugh, for joining me today. Great conversation, and I hope our audience took some practical things away from that conversation. We can certainly pull together some of your recommendations and shoot that out to the people that attended.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. It's good.
Thanks, Hugh. You have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. You too.